Can you guys hear me and see my screen? Hi guys, can you actually hear me? It's okay, can you guys probably in the chat just give me kind of thumbs up, just so that I know that you guys can hear me and see my screen. Sure. Okay, thanks Harry. Yeah. Cool, thanks. Yeah, thanks Shirley as well. Yep. All right, probably just give it a couple of minutes, guys, to see if anyone else comes in before I start my the workshop here today. All right, it's I guess 2:30 Jakarta time on the clock. Just give a few more seconds before we kick off this session. So just because this is a virtual conference, it's really hard to be interactive. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to put in the chat, and during the talk, I'll constantly just look at the chat and see if there are any questions, and if we have time, probably address those questions as well. Or just give it one more minute and we'll start. All right, so thanks everyone for joining up here today for this workshop. Just trying to load my screen there. So yep, thanks once again. So today we have a typical scenario where we have a single page application communicating with a protected API endpoint on the right here, trying to access the protected resource that sits behind this API endpoint, right? And for this application, there are a group of users that needs to authenticate before they're able to use the application. And within this pool of authenticated users, there are a subset of users with elevated privileges that can and are only allowed to call the API endpoint and access the protected resource. So how can you secure your applications and API endpoints so that only the users with a higher privilege can access those endpoints. Or to phrase it more correctly, how can you implement authentication and authorization to authorize only authorized personnel to access the protected resource? So my name is John, and I'm a solutions engineer at Auth0. And today we'll take a look at how you can implement access control for your API endpoints easily, quickly, and efficiently with Auth0. So from an agenda standpoint, because we'll be using and leveraging Auth0's capabilities today, just so that everyone's on the same page, I'll give you a quick, 2-minute developer's take on what Auth0 is. Right, and then we'll jump into the live coding session where we'll be building out a brand new application from scratch and implement authentication and authorization for it, and thereby implementing access control for API endpoints. And then time permitting, at the end, we'll jump to a quick Q&A session. But just in case we run out of time, please feel free to reach out to me either via email, Twitter, or LinkedIn, or pop over to the Auth0 booth after this talk, so that we can have a quick chat. Right, so what is Auth0? Auth0 is a service for developers and application builders to authenticate and authorize users into their application. Now, authentication and authorization has been around for a very long time, but it is an ever-changing and evolving landscape. New security threats surface up, new standards or best practices get established, and new ways to do authentication are constantly being developed. So for example, this recent sign-in with Apple ID or the up-and-coming WebAuthn. When I speak to developers or application builders that have to build or maintain an identity solution, they tell me they do it with a lot of pain and frustration, right? Not only is there a steep learning curve, for example, with all the various security and authentication protocols out there, right, the complexities and risk associated with developing identity is often underestimated, and this negatively impacts their time to market. And what's most troubling is the fact that usually they aren't security experts, nor organizations actually, provide them with the luxury of actually spending time and focus on implementing identity. So what Auth0 has done is packaged all the years of best practices, know-how, and security expertise, and packaged it into a service so that developers and application builders can simply pick it up and use it and not have to worry about implementing identity, and instead focus all that time and energy to solve their unique business problems instead, right? So over here at Auth0, like we say, right, we want to secure the world's identities so that innovators like yourselves can innovate. So what you see here in this slide really is all, on the high level, all the capabilities that the Auth0 platform provides, but in today's demonstration, we're just going through a very small subset of these. Right, so jumping into the live coding session, what we're going to do here in today's session is firstly to create an Auth0 tenant. And then we'll create and configure an application, right, to use Auth0 for authentication. We will then modify the application to call the protected API endpoint and implement role-based access control for authorization, right? And finally, just kind of see it in action. All right. So, again, if you have any questions, just feel free to put it in the chat, right? And let's try to make this interactive if possible. Awesome. So first thing we need to do is to pop over to auth0.com and click the sign up button, right, to sign up for an Auth0 account. Right, and it's as simple as just entering an email and a password or signing up with one of these social providers here. Right, and once you create sign up for an Auth0 account, Auth0 will direct you to create a tenant, right? And what you see here is part of our public cloud offering, which allows you to create a tenant either in Australia, Europe, or the US region. I'm just going to enter, a name here to create a tenant in the Australia region because that's closest to me, where I am from in Singapore. So let me enter a name here, say API Days, and let's give it today's date, which is 2020-0930. right, and hit create. And once we've Auth0's created a tenant for you, you will be directed to what you see here, the Auth0 management dashboard, right? It is a graphical user interface that allows you to manage your tenant configuration. And because Auth0 is an API-first company, all the tenant management features that you see here are actually exposed by Auth0 management APIs, right? And there's a handy little document link here to management API. And then my daughter just came in to take her Pokemon toys. I don't know if I've seen it, but so anyway, so here is the Auth0 management API documentation that lists down all the management APIs that we exposed and detailed documentation on how you actually use them. Right. Coming back to the dashboard, I'm not sure how many of you are really into agile practice or on CI/CD, but I'm a big proponent of it. And one of the things that Auth0 really helps here is that all the tenant management here, the config, Auth0 actually allows you to manage them as code. So what this means is that you can version control it, programmatically deploy it to your various staging environments, production environments, etc., and then roll them back if necessary. So with these APIs and the tools as well that Auth0 provides, plus this configuration as code, right, Auth0 really plugs in nicely into any CI/CD platform or workflow that you have. Right. So sorry to digress there, but so coming back, we have signed up for an Auth0 account and we have created an Auth0 tenant. So if I head back to my slides here, I can cross that one out. Right. So the next thing we need to do is to create and configure an application for authentication using Auth0. So if we head back to the dashboard here, right, we don't have an existing application yet. We are going to build out from scratch, but we need to model or represent that application within Auth0. So let's go ahead and click Create Application. So as you can see here, Auth0 supports a wide range of application types, from your native apps, single-page web apps, regular web apps, as well as your machine-to-machine applications, or in our case, APIs. Let's give it a name here. Let's call it, say, my website, right? And click. And today we're going to build out a single-page app, and so we can click Create that. Right, and Auth0 is then going to ask us what our tech stack is. Right, and out of the box, Auth0 provides over 64 quick starts and ready-to-use SDKs that we can simply pick it up, drop into our app, and we're up and running. Right, and for a single-page app, you can see that we provide Angular, JavaScript, React, and Vue SDKs. And what's really powerful about these SDKs, personally for me, is that it solves a lot of things that I didn't know, especially on the security aspects of it, like preventing CSRF attacks. Right, so with these JavaScript, it just enables us to abstract away all the underlying protocols, and just simply by a few function calls, we will have authentication and authorization. So kind of let's see that in action. I am going to click the JavaScript SDK here, and Auth0 gives us a couple of options. The first is, and this is the typical use case, you have an existing application. Auth0 provides step-by-step instructions on how you can integrate Auth0 into your application. And we provide what we call live documentation, which are snippets of code here that you can simply copy and paste it into your app. And it comes preceded with your tenant settings, for example here, making it that much easier to copy and paste. And so Auth0 focuses a lot on the developer experience, and it's just little things like this that Auth0 does that developers really appreciate us for. But in our use case today, we are going to build out a brand new application. So we are going with the second option, which is to download a sample that is pre-configured with our tenant settings as well. Right, so I'm going to click this download button here. Let's quickly walk through the instructions Auth0 gives. So with what it says here is to set the allowed callback URLs, right, the allowed web origins, as well as the allowed logout URLs to localhost 3000. So I'm going to copy that. Just not downloading yet, so I'm just going to wait for that to happen. You guys still hearing me all right? Because, kind of getting spotty internet connection these days here. Right, that's downloaded. So let's head back to settings, right, and set the allow callback URL, allow logout URLs, as well as the allow web origins. Now, just a pro tip here, because we are, if we want to run off localhost, Auth0 treats localhost slightly differently, and that's just for security reasons. So let's actually update that to an alias running off my localhost, which is really just my website here. And because we aren't running off localhost anymore, right, the Auth0 SPA SDK that we are using uses the web API, crypto API. So that it requires us to run off a secure context. So we've got to run it over HTTPS. So let me copy those changes and also populate it for the allow logout URLs, as well as the allow web origins. Right, and I'm going to hit save changes there. Right, so let's actually set up our application so that it runs off over HTTPS as well as my alias. So I pop into my terminal here. I am going to copy over the downloaded file, sample application. Right, and I'm going to unzip that. And let me just clean up that that zip file there. All right, and let's go inside the directory and just take a look. All right, it's all there. So let me open up this application in my IDE. So my IDE here, open. All right, there, and let me just bring it over to the screen so you guys can see it. Right. So to set it up to run over HTTPS, we need to just kind of modify two files. The first one is this bin folder www. You can see that what we're really doing is requiring this server.js file, so we can actually just ignore the rest of the code there. And let's open the server.js file. And I'm just going to copy over some boilerplate code here and paste it inside this file here. And we can take a look at the local history, like a diff of the changes, so that you guys can understand what we're really doing here. So what we're doing is requiring the HTTPS node module as well as the file system. And what it's essentially doing is we're reading in the Ssl certificates and then creating a server and using those certificates to launch the application over HTTPS. Right, so with that change, let's head back out to the terminal. And kind of just to, so now we have to actually generate that Ssl certificate. So I'm going to use the program called mkcert, and I'm going to call it my website. And so now I have the Ssl certificates there. And to really just to round up the conversation or on the topic, just a quick look at my etc host files here, right? So that you can see that I have actually just aliased, my website to localhost. Right, so now we've got that set up. Let's run npm install and npm start. Questions, anyone? All good? All right. In case you guys aren't following along as well, please just feel free to put in the chat or any questions, really. Right, so now that the application is running, if I head back to my browser here, right, and my website, right, you can see that it is loaded and it's running over HTTPS there, that log symbol, as well as alias to my website. So before we move any further, it's probably a good idea to take a look at the sample application that we downloaded, just to understand a little bit how it's working. So there are really only three files here that are of interest. The first is index.html, which is essentially our single page app with all the HTML tags, etc. But what we're really interested in is at the bottom of this file. Let me close that window there. Right, at these script tags here. The first is this line here, which shows that we are pulling in or using the Auth0 SPA SDK, right? And the current latest version is actually 1.9. So let's update that so that we can use the latest features of the platform as well as the SDK. And the other two files are UI.js and app.js. So if we head into public folder here on the left under JS and take a look at UI.js. So, right, so UI.js is essentially our view here, or view manager, right? And because we're not using a platform or framework here, we are writing our own router, which simply takes a look at the path URL path that we're on, and then we'll display the view accordingly. And app.js contains kind of the core logic of our application and handle things like, as you can see here, login, right? Login and logout. But what we're really interested in, kind of highlight, to you guys here, is in this configure client function here, which essentially just initializes the Auth0 SDK. Right, and so I'm going to add just one parameter here called cache location, right, and to local storage. And what this will do is this will enable us to take a look at what Auth0 returns to the application inside local storage. So more like a debugging flag there that was set in there. Right, so with that all set up, let me cancel this and restart the app. Right, it's running there. Let's head back and refresh this page. So now this downloaded sample application, it is using Auth0 SDKs. Let's click login and see what happens. Right, so just like that, with when a user signs in, the user now is being redirected to Auth0, where Auth0 is handling the authentication request, right? So just from this perspective, really easily create a tenant, register an application, right? And using Auth0 SDKs, very quickly and simply, we have authentication for the application. Because I don't have an existing user within this Auth0 tenant, let's go ahead and sign up for as a new user. So I'm going to use some existing credentials I have here. I'm going to click sign up. All right. What happened there? Let me just let's show this caching issue. Take a look at the console. Let me just collection clear site data as well. And let me go back to my website there. Let me just clean all the cache as well. All right, and let me just refresh that. So the error is there. Console, no, it seems all right. Let's log in one more time. Right, and let's try this one more time. Okay, let's click sign up again. Let's see. Close that. That's blocking my screen. That's all right. Sign up. Yep, and probably some caching issues there. So I am logged in, right? And if I actually just head over to my profile here, right, you can see some of the information that Auth0 returns. Right, so probably a good point here, is hop back over the slides here. I am going to say we have created and configured an application for Auth0 for authentication, right? And it's probably a good time here to kind of peel back, the curtains and take a look at what's happening under the hood here. So I have a nice little handy slide here that kind of explains what's going on. Right, so we still have our single page application, right, and our protected API endpoint. So when in fact we've already added Auth0 here as an authorization server. So now when a user wants to authenticate into the single page application, right, it makes a request or authorization request, authentication request in this case to Auth0. Now Auth0 under the hood uses OpenID Connect. So part of that protocol, the user an access token if his credentials match, right? So user logs in, username, password in this case, right? If those are valid, Auth0 will return the user an ID token, right? Thereby effectively proving who he say he is. And we can take a look at, remember how we set up the local storage to the cache location to local storage? We can pop back into the dev console here, take a look at local storage and see what's being returned by Auth0. So you will see as part of that response, we do have an ID token. So let's actually copy that, head over to jwt.io or jot.io, and we can actually code that inside here. Right? So take a look at the ID token that is being returned. Right? You can see that it contains standard claims as part of the OpenID Connect protocol. Right? And you can see, for example, my name, Siri turned on for example. Right, and my nickname, my picture, who the issuer is, etc. Right, so now we can go ahead and actually modify this application to call our API endpoint. Right, so let's make some changes now in our code to call our API endpoint. Right, I am going to first add a button within the graphical user interface there so that we can trigger it to call our API endpoint. So I am in UI.js, index.html. I am going to copy and paste, reuse a button. Right, so I'm going to copy this block of code here. Right, and I don't need the ID. On click, I am going to call get secret. So our API information, and by calling this API endpoint, will give us back the secret. And in this case, modify that one awesome button symbol that we'll be using, and update this text. Right. So with those changes, let me restart this app. Right, and head back to our application here. Let me close this. And let me refresh as well. Right, so if I look at the menu item here now, we got an additional button where we can trigger our API. And if I click that, well, I haven't wired it up so that you can see get secret is not defined here. So let's go back into the code and wire that up. So I'm going to go to app.js here. I go to the bottom of the file, and let's add that get secret function. Right. Secret. Right, and this is going to make some asynchronous call. So let's go ahead and see sync and enormous function here and call get secret and make a request to our API endpoint. So response equals fetch. Right, and we're going to pass in the URL in a little bit, and let's add in just some parameters here. Right, so the first is it is going to be the method. It's going to be get. Right, and for headers, right, we need to specify that this is content type. It's going to be application JSON. We'll track this as UTF-8. And because this is an application JSON response, let's actually parse that response, right? Response.json, right? And oops, right? And async this call. I think it's correct. And just for debugging, let's actually go ahead and print out that response. So, I don't know why Siri keeps activating it, right? Okay, so response. Not sure I understand. Response equals and secret. Let me just okay. With that change, let me restart the app. So start. Back in the application here, let's clear this thing. Let's actually call get secret. It's not defined. Did I refresh this page? Double check. Right, let's call get secret. Right, response, so it's not a function. Okay, let's see what's happening there. Wait, response JSON. So response was await. Sorry, asynchronous stuff. Forgot to await again. Right, so let's restart this app one more time. Right, let's refresh this. Right, and try and get secret. Right, and if we take a look at the network tab here, let's try that one more time. But it's wrong now. What? Say async. Get secret on click. Wait, okay, let me just double check this. Oh, sorry, no, I forgot to fill in the URL to our endpoint. So, yep, right, oops. Let me copy the, oops, let me just make sure I got this endpoint copied correctly over here. So this API endpoint, for the purpose of this demonstration, it is simply a serverless Lambda function sitting behind an API gateway. So we are going to call that now. So let me do that, and let me start one more time. Let's refresh this again, and now call get secret. Right, and the response you're seeing is that it is unauthorized. So what is happening here? So this is a good point again, kind of a segue, good segue where we can talk a little bit about, access tokens. So like I mentioned, under the covers, Auth0 uses OpenID Connect, which is part of or built upon the Auth0 protocol. And so as part of that protocol, when an application is trying to make a call to an API point, it needs to pass it an access token, right? So in our case here, the user, after he logs in, although he gets an ID token, he does need to make an authorization request, in this case to Auth0, and request for an access token, right? And then the application will take this access token and in its request to the API endpoint, pass this access token to that API endpoint. And then it's the responsibility of the API endpoint at this point to inspect that access token and validate that this token or the caller of this or the application really has access to the protected resource. Right? So because in our code you can see we're just making a call to the API endpoint, we haven't got any access token. So let's actually go fix that up within Auth0, right? And in our code as well. So within Auth0, right, what we need to do is to register that API endpoint in Auth0, or rather model or represent that API within Auth0. And I'm going to click here, create API. right? And go give it a name, say my secret API, right? And then it's also asking for an identifier, so it's going to be HTTPS, right? And call it, say, my secret API, and I'm going to click create, right? And also does provide some kind of templates here. And this essentially what this code here is saying is that from your endpoint perspective, you should actually have check and validate that access token. For example, in this case, it would validate who the audience is, who the issue is, etc., before it allows access to the API endpoint. So, but in our case, I have an API endpoint set up already, and for all purposes of this demonstration, you can assume that I've copied and pasted this code over there. So in settings, what we need to do is, actually not in settings yet, sorry. So we created the API endpoint. Let's actually give or define the scopes of permissions that this API has. So I'm going to say read secret here, and really the description is to read secret. Right, I'm going to click add that down. And that is done. So if I now head back to my IDE here, just really conscious of time, might have only like, oops, not much time left. Right. So what I'm going to do here now is make a get the access token from Auth0, right? So all right, code here. Right. So get an access token equals get Auth0 using the SDK here. Get token silent, please. Right. Let me go pass in some parameters here, which is essentially just the audience, right? Saying that we want to get an access token for the API, which we call HTTP. We called it my secret API, right? And we're going to take that token now and actually pass it as part of the authorization header. Authorization as part of the bearer token. The access token. Right, so let's see that in action. Let me restart the application again. There, and then npm start. Right, and let's refresh this. And actually call get secret again. Right, but in this case, you can see that its access is denied kind of one more time. And let's actually debug this a little bit by taking a look at the. Let me just check here the access token. Sorry. So AUTH authorization there typo. Let's create API. Let's try that just one more time. Actually, let me that. And actually, let me refresh this page one more time. So if I take a look, not returning me my access token is expected. Okay. Responses now seems right. Okay, so maybe what I didn't do might be because I might not have requested the scope. Access token. Okay, let's pass in the scope here. Right, and put read. Right, and that should hopefully that. Oops. npm start one more time, and let me refresh this page. Right, so here, okay, it gets rid. Access service not found. My okay, sorry. This is go there. Forgot a slash. All right. So last time should work this time. And I'm just going to refresh this last time, clear that, right, and get secret, right, and netbook there, right, and you can see kind of there's an error there, and right, and really the issue here is that if we come back, the API endpoint here, although we pass an access token, it isn't authorized to call the API endpoint, right? Just need to double check as well. Is this? Yep, that's right. It isn't calling the API, authorized to call the API endpoint. So it's a good time to quickly talk about what authorization and access control is. So authorization and access control is the process of defining and limiting which users are allowed access to which resources, right? And there are many authorization models out there. And one of the most commonly used models out there is role-based access control, which is supported out of the box by Auth0, right? And role-based access control refers to the idea of assigning permissions to users based on their roles within an organization, right? And so in our case here, where we have different users with different privileges, much like an admin and a user, a role-based access control maps really well to our domain here, right? So let's actually implement role-based access control using Auth0. So if we head back to the Auth0 dashboard here, right, I am going into settings and I will turn on enable RBAC, right, role-based access control, and I'll add permissions inside the access token as well. Right, and I'm going to click save. Right, and because we've enabled or we set permissions here, right, we can start assigning permissions to individual users, giving them those permissions to call the API. However, assigning permissions to individual users can be tedious and error prone. So because we've enabled RBAC, we can actually go into roles and group all these permissions under roles. Right? Get a role here, for example, click admin, admin there, and click create. Right? And I can then go under permissions and add permissions, sort of grouping all those all those permissions for my secret API or scopes under this role. Right? And now I can actually then give a user this role, which I'm going to do by adding myself here, signing in, right, adding a user to that role. Right, so with that set up, let me quickly just head back there, right, and then let me log in again. All right, let me just use that console here and click login. Right, and just interest of time here, I am just going to copy this block of code, right, because we're running out of time, and just kind of replace it there. So essentially, just quickly run, we are now getting an access token, calling our API endpoint there, right, with the right scopes and passing that access token authorization bearer. There's header, and we will get a response back from the API endpoint. So one final, let me just restart this app. Right, and if I refresh there, let's take a look at that. Right, and oops, let's actually, I got to log out one more time, sorry. Right, because we added roles for this user, so let's log in one more time. Log in. right? And then make an API call to API endpoint, right? And you can see here the response contains that secret code. And just really quickly, if we debug this and step into my local storage, oops, okay, there, right? You can see the access token returned by Auth0, right? Contains the scopes, in this case read secret, and the permission to read secret, which the API kind of checks and validates at its side, and because it contains these claims, will give me access to the API, to the resource behind that API endpoint. Right, so I think, so to kind of conclude, hopefully in this demonstration, I provided some value to you guys, and hopefully you've seen how easy, it is to actually implement authentication and authorization using Auth0. Again, if you guys have any questions or want to find out more about Auth0 as well, please feel free to actually, hit me up on either email, Twitter, or LinkedIn there, or pop over to the Auth0 booth after this workshop. So I'm just kind of wondering how much time I have left. Just any questions? If there were any questions, I might just have 1 minute where I can take the question. Seems all good. Then thank you guys all for taking the time out and attending to this session. Again, it was valuable for you guys. So well then, thanks. Signing out now then. Have a great day, everyone.